The massive space station floated silently in the darkness between two star systems. Harmony Point was neutral territory, built specifically for meetings like this one. Its gleaming white corridors stretched for miles, filled with the hum of life support systems keeping dozens of different species alive in one shared space. Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked through those corridors with measured steps, her polished black shoes clicking against the metal floor. She had been Earth's top diplomat for 15 years, but today felt different. Today could change the future of humanity forever. Elena paused at a viewport and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, human colonies were under threat. Families were packing their belongings, not knowing if they would have homes tomorrow. Children were asking their parents why the sky sometimes lit up with explosions. This meeting had to work. She adjusted her navy blue suit jacket and continued walking. The Earth delegation had arrived 2 days early to prepare. But Elena knew that preparation could only do so much. The Zephyrians were unlike any species humanity had ever encountered. They were older, more advanced, and according to reports, they considered themselves superior to everyone else in the galaxy. The conference room doors were 30 feet tall, made of some crystalline material that seemed to shift colors as Elena approached. The human security officers nodded at her as she passed. Inside, the room was enormous, with a circular table that could seat 100 beings. The lighting was soft and warm, designed to be comfortable for multiple species. Elena took her seat at the human section of the table. Her hands were slightly damp with nervous sweat, but her breathing was steady. She had learned long ago that fear was natural, but panic was a choice. Round the table, delegates from a dozen different worlds waited in silence. Then the Zephyrians entered. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Not literally, but something about their presence made the air feel thinner. They moved like liquid starlight, their bodies tall and graceful in ways that made humans look clumsy by comparison. Their skin had an inner glow, like moonlight on water, and their eyes were the deep purple of distant nebulae. Princess Lyrale walked at the center of the group, even among her own people. She stood out. She was taller than the others, and the light from her skin was brighter. Her long silver hair flowed behind her like it was moving underwater. Everything about her screamed royalty, power, and perhaps most importantly, complete confidence in her own superiority. The other delegates at the table shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Elena noticed how some of them lowered their heads slightly, an instinctive gesture of submission. The Zephyrians were used to this reaction. In fact, they expected it. Princess Lyrale's violet eyes swept across the room, cataloging each species. Present, when her gaze reached the human section, Elena felt the weight of that stare. It was not hostile, exactly, but it was the look someone might give to an interesting insect. Curious, but ultimately dismissive, the princess took her seat across from Elena. The Zephyrian chair adjusted itself to her body. Some kind of advanced technology that humanity was still decades away from understanding. Her advisors arranged themselves around her like planets orbiting a star. They spoke to each other in their musical language, voices like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Elena could see the princess studying her. The human ambassador was smaller than most beings in the room, her brown hair pulled back in a simple style, her dark eyes alert but calm. There was nothing particularly impressive about her appearance. To someone like Princess Lyrale, who had grown up surrounded by beings who could manipulate matter with their minds, or survive in the vacuum of space, humans must have seemed impossibly fragile. The formal introductions began. Each delegate stood and announced their species, their world, and their authority to negotiate. When it was Elena's turn, she rose smoothly and spoke in a clear voice that carried across the vast room. I am Ambassador Elena Vasquez, representing Earth and the Human Colonial Alliance. I come here with the full authority of my government in the hopes of billions of people who want nothing more than to live in peace. She sat down without fanfare, no dramatic gestures, no attempts to impress anyone with humanity's achievements, just simple honesty about why she was there. Princess Lyrale tilted her head slightly. This was not what she had expected. Most species, when faced with Zephyrian royalty, Either tried to appear more impressive than they were or immediately showed submission. The human had done neither. She had simply stated her purpose and sat down, as if she were talking to an equal. One of the princess's advisors leaned close and whispered something in the musical Zephyrian language. Elena couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clearly disapproving. The advisor kept glancing at Elena, and she got the impression that the conversation was about proper protocol, and the human's apparent ignorance of it. Princess Lyrale raised a delicate hand, and her advisor fell silent. She studied Elena for a long moment, those purple eyes trying to understand what she was seeing. In Zephyrian culture, everyone knew their place in the hierarchy. Everyone understood who was superior and who was inferior. It was the natural order of things. But this human seemed completely unaware of her proper place. She sat straight in her chair, met the princess's gaze without flinching, and showed no signs of the awe or fear that the princess was accustomed to. Inspiring, it was puzzling, and Princess Lyrale found herself more intrigued than offended. The opening ceremonies continued around them, but the princess kept stealing glances at Elena. The human ambassador took notes on a simple paper tablet, occasionally nodding at something another delegate said. She appeared to be listening carefully to everyone, treating each speaker with the same level of attention regardless of their species or apparent importance. When the formal session ended for the day, the various delegations began to leave the conference room. Princess Lyrale lingered, watching as Elena gathered her materials with efficient practice movements. The human looked up and noticed the princess watching her. For a moment, their eyes met across the vast table. Elena offered a small, professional smile and nodded politely before turning to leave with her own delegation. It was a simple gesture, the kind of acknowledgement one professional might give to another. Princess Lyrale felt something she had never experienced before. Not anger at the perceived slight, not amusement at human ignorance, but genuine curiosity about a being who seemed completely unimpressed by everything. That made the princess special. As she walked back to her quarters surrounded by her advisors, she found herself thinking about that brief moment of eye contact and wondering what, exactly, she had seen in those calm, dark human eyes. 3 days of negotiations had passed, and the talks were going nowhere fast. The main conference room had become a battlefield of words, with each side making demands that the other couldn't possibly accept. Elena sat at the human delegation table, watching the Zephyrian representatives speak in their flowing language while their translation devices turned their musical words into cold, harsh ultimatums. The Zephyrians wanted territory. Lots of it. They demanded that humans abandon 12 colonial worlds, leaving behind cities that had taken decades to build and farms that fed millions of people. In return, they offered to stop their military advances and consider humans worthy of continued existence in their corner of the galaxy. Elena had seen many difficult negotiations in her career, but this felt different. The Zephyrians weren't just asking for land or resources. They were asking humanity to accept that they were inferior beings, who should be grateful for whatever scraps the Empire chose to leave them. During a break in the formal sessions, Elena found herself walking through the station's observation deck. The view of space was spectacular here, with stars scattered like diamonds against black velvet. She wasn't alone. Princess Lyrale stood at the far end of the deck, her silver hair catching the light from distant suns. Elena considered turning around and leaving the princess to her thoughts. But something made her stay. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the growing sense that the formal negotiations weren't going to solve anything. She walked over and stood a respectful distance away, looking out at the same view. "It's beautiful," Elena said quietly, not sure if the princess would even acknowledge her presence. Princess Lyrale turned slightly, those violet eyes studying Elena's profile. "You humans always focus on beauty," she said, her voice carrying a musical quality even when speaking the human language. "We see strategic positions, resource potential, defensive advantages." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe that's why we're having trouble understanding each other." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Princess Lyrale spoke again, and this time her voice carried a harder edge. Your people need to accept reality, Ambassador. The Zephyrian Empire has existed for thousands of years. We have technologies your species cannot imagine. We have conquered star systems before your ancestors learned to make fire. This negotiation is not between equals. Elena turned to face the princess fully. Her voice remained calm, but there was something in her dark eyes that hadn't been there before. You're right about one thing, Princess. We're not equals. Princess Lyrale raised an eyebrow, clearly expecting Elena to continue with some admission of human inferiority. Instead, Elena said, "We're different. Your people measure worth by age and power. Mine measure it by what we're willing to sacrifice. For others," the princess's expression shifted slightly. This wasn't the response she had expected. "Sacrifice is weakness. The strong take what they need." Elena shook her head. "Yesterday, I received a message from New Haven Colony. It's one of the worlds you want us to abandon. A teacher there has been organizing evacuation procedures for the children in her school. She could leave on the first transport ship, but she's staying until every child is safe. She's not strong enough to fight your ships or smart enough to build new weapons, but she's willing to risk everything for kids who aren't even her own." Princess Lyrale was quiet, but Elena could see she was listening intently. "There's a farmer on Riverside Colony," Elena continued. "His crops feed 10,000 people. Your advanced scouts destroyed his equipment, but he's still working his fields by hand. He knows your main fleet might arrive any day, but he's planting seeds anyway, hoping someone will be there to harvest them." The princess's glowing skin seemed to dim slightly. "These are just stories, Ambassador. Individual acts of foolishness." Elena's voice remained steady, but there was passion in it now. "Are they? Let me tell you about the families sharing their homes with strangers who fled the first attacks. About the doctors working without sleep to treat both human and alien refugees. About the pilots volunteering for dangerous missions to evacuate civilians from worlds they've never even visited." Princess Lyrale turned to look out at space again, but Elena could see that her perfect composure was cracking slightly. "You want to know what I see when I look at those stars?" Elena asked. "I see the dreams of every child who's ever looked up and wondered what's out there. I see the hopes of parents who want their kids to inherit a universe where different species can work together instead of destroying each other. And yes, I see the fear of people who don't understand why beings as advanced as the Zephyrians would choose conquest over cooperation." The princess was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than before. "Your people are weak. They will be consumed by those stronger than them. This is the way of the universe." Elena shook her head. "Princess, with respect, I think you're confusing strength with the absence of fear. The people I told you about, they're all afraid. The teacher is terrified she won't get the children out in time. The farmer knows his crops might never be harvested, but they're doing what's right anyway. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing there is." Princess Lyrale looked at Elena with something that might have been confusion. In Zephyrian society, fear was something to be eliminated or hidden. The strong didn't feel fear, and if they did, they certainly didn't act on behalf of others while experiencing it. "I don't understand your species," the princess admitted, and for the first time since the negotiations began, she sounded less like royalty and more like someone genuinely trying to comprehend something foreign. Elena smiled sadly. "Maybe that's the problem. You're trying to understand us the same way you understand everything else, through power and hierarchy. But humans aren't motivated by being the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. We're motivated by love, hope, and the belief that tomorrow can be better than today." The princess stared at Elena for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. But as she left, Elena noticed something different in her posture. The absolute certainty was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like Elena remained on the observation deck, watching the stars and thinking about the conversation. She had told the princess the truth about humanity, but she wondered if truth was enough to bridge the gap between two species that saw the universe in completely different ways. Tomorrow's negotiations would tell her if understanding was possible, or if some differences were simply too great to overcome. The explosion came without warning. One moment, Elena was reviewing her notes in her quarters, preparing for another day of difficult negotiations. The next moment, the entire space station shook like a leaf in a storm. Emergency lights flashed red, and alarms blared through the corridors. Elena grabbed her emergency kit and rushed toward the door. Her diplomatic training had included emergency procedures, but she had never expected to use them on a peace summit. The corridor outside her room was chaos. Beings from dozens of different species were running in all directions, some toward escape pods, others toward emergency stations. The station's computer voice echoed through the halls in multiple languages. Hull breach in Sector 7. All personnel evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. Elena pushed against the flow of evacuating people, moving toward Sector 7 instead of away from it. Her security team would be furious with her later, but she couldn't shake the feeling that people might need help. Her emergency kit contained medical supplies and breathing masks that could keep someone alive. Until rescue teams arrived, Sector 7 was the station's commercial area, where delegates often went to shop or eat during breaks and negotiations. If the explosion had happened during busy hours, there could be dozens of injured beings trapped in the wreckage. As Elena made her way through the damaged corridors, the artificial gravity flickered on and off. During the off moments, she had to grab onto handholds to keep from floating into the ceiling. The air was getting thinner too. Whatever had caused the explosion had damaged the life support systems. She found the first group of survivors huddled. In what used to be a restaurant, the blast had torn a hole in the outer wall, and emergency barriers had sealed it off. But not before several beings had been injured by flying debris. Elena recognized some of them as members of various diplomatic delegations. Among the injured was Princess Lyrale. The princess was sitting against a wall, her usually perfect appearance disheveled. Her silver hair was tangled, and there was a cut on her forehead that glowed with purple blood. Around her, several other Zephyrians lay unconscious or groaning in pain. Elena didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees beside the princess and began examining her injuries. "Are you hurt anywhere else besides your head?" Princess Lyrale looked up at Elena with surprise. "You should be evacuating. This area is not safe." "Neither is anywhere else on the station right now," Elena replied, pulling medical supplies from her kit. "Hold still. This might sting a little." As Elena worked to clean and bandage the princess's wound, she could feel those violet eyes watching her every movement. "Why are you helping me?" the princess asked quietly. Elena paused in her work. "Because you're hurt and I can help. Does there need to be another reason?" Before the princess could answer, another explosion rocked the station. This one was closer, and Elena could hear the groan of metal under stress. A section of the ceiling began to buckle, and she realized with horror that it was going to collapse right on top of a group of unconscious beings from various species. Without thinking, Elena threw herself forward, positioning her body between the falling debris and the injured survivors. She spread her arms wide, knowing that her fragile human frame couldn't possibly stop tons of twisted metal, but hoping that maybe she could deflect it enough to save the others. The debris came down like an avalanche. Elena closed her eyes and waited for the crushing impact that would probably end her life. But it never came. She opened her eyes to see Princess Lyrale standing above her, both hands raised toward the ceiling. The princess's skin was glowing brighter than Elena had ever seen it, and the falling debris was frozen in midair, held back by some kind of energy field. "I can hold it," the princess said through gritted teeth. "But not for long. Get them out of there." Elena didn't waste time asking questions. She grabbed the nearest unconscious being, a small reptilian creature she recognized as part of the Endorian delegation, and dragged him clear of the danger zone. Then she went back for another, and another. Her injured arm throbbed with each movement, but she kept going. Behind her, she could hear Princess Lyrale straining with the effort of holding back the debris. The princess's breathing was getting heavier, and Elena knew she was pushing herself beyond her limits. "That's the last one," Elena called out as she pulled a wounded Zephyrian to safety. Princess Lyrale released her hold on the debris, and it crashed to the floor with a deafening bang. The princess staggered and would have fallen if Elena hadn't caught her arm. "Are you okay?" Elena asked, noticing that the princess's glow had dimmed considerably. Princess Lyrali stared at Elena with an expression that was completely unreadable. "You were willing to die for them, for beings you don't even know." Elena looked back at the group of survivors they had saved. They were from 6 different species, including several Zephyrians. "Of course I was. Wouldn't you do the same?" The princess was quiet for a long moment. In Zephyrian culture, self-sacrifice for strangers was not just uncommon. It was considered a sign of mental deficiency. The strong survived by looking out for themselves first. Yet here was this small human who had thrown herself into certain death without a moment's hesitation. "I have never met anyone like you," the princess said finally. Elena managed a tired smile. "I'm not special, princess. Any decent person would have done the same thing." But Princess Lyrali knew that wasn't true. She had met thousands of beings from hundreds of species, and none of them would have acted as Elena had. The human's instant willingness to sacrifice herself for strangers had shattered something fundamental in the princess's understanding of how intelligent beings behave. As rescue teams finally arrived and began evacuating the survivors, Princess Lyrali found herself walking beside Elena toward the medical bay. The human was limping slightly and had several cuts from flying debris, but she kept stopping to check on other injured beings they passed in the corridors. "You're hurt too," the princess pointed out when Elena paused to help an elderly being from the Centaurian delegation. "I'm fine," Elena replied, but the princess could see that she wasn't. There was blood on Elena's sleeve, and she was favoring her left side. For the first time in her life, Princess Lyrali felt something she had never experienced before: genuine respect for someone she had initially considered inferior. The human's courage wasn't the reckless bravery of a warrior, or the calculated risk-taking of a strategist. It was something purer and more incomprehensible: the simple willingness to put others before herself, even when those others were complete strangers from alien worlds. As they reached the medical bay, Princess Lyrali realized that everything she thought she knew about strength, weakness, and the natural order of the universe had just been turned upside down by a small human diplomat who insisted she wasn't special at all. The medical bay was quieter now. Most of the injured had been treated and moved to recovery rooms, but Eleanor remained in bed with her arm in a sling and bandages wrapped around her ribs. The doctors had insisted she stay for observation, worried about internal injuries from when she had thrown herself toward the falling debris. Elena stared at the ceiling, thinking about the attack. The investigation had revealed that a radical group called the Void Seekers had planted the bomb. They wanted to stop any peace between humans and Zephyrians. Believing that war was the natural state of the universe, their terrorist act had nearly succeeded in destroying the negotiations entirely. A soft sound at the door made Elena turn her head. Princess Lyrali stood in the doorway, looking uncertain for the first time since Elena had met her. The princess's usual confident posture was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like nervousness. "May I come in?" the princess asked. Elena nodded and tried to sit up straighter, wincing as her injured ribs protested. "Of course, princess. How are you feeling?" Princess Lyrali entered the room and closed the door behind her. Instead of taking the chair beside Elena's bed, she remained standing, as if she couldn't quite decide what to do with herself. "My injuries were minor," the princess said. "The doctors say I will recover completely within a few days. But I wanted to thank you for what you did." Elena looked surprised. "Thank me? You're the one who saved everyone. If you hadn't held back that debris, we all would have been crushed." The princess shook her head. "You don't understand. You threw yourself into danger to protect strangers. In my culture, such an act would be considered." She paused, searching for the right words in the human language. "A form of madness." Elena frowned. "Madness? But they were people who needed help." "That is exactly what I don't understand," Princess Lyrali said, finally taking the chair beside Elena's bed. "In Zephyrian society, we are taught from birth that survival depends on strength and self-preservation. The weak are meant to serve the strong, and the strong are meant to protect only their own kind. Your actions make no sense to me. Elena studied the princess's face for the first time. She could see past the royal mask to something more vulnerable underneath. Tell me about your childhood, princess. What was it like growing up as Zephyrian royalty? Princess Lyrale was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, she began to speak. I was trained from the age of 3 to be a leader. Every day, I had lessons in strategy, combat, and the art of commanding others. I was taught that showing mercy was weakness, that caring for inferior species would make me unfit to rule. Her voice grew softer. I remember once, when I was 7 years old, I found an injured creature in the palace gardens. It was from a species that served as laborers in our empire. I wanted to help it, but my tutor found me before I could. He explained that rulers do not waste time on the weak, and that my impulse to help was a flaw that needed to be corrected. Elena felt a pang of sadness for the child the princess had been. That must have been lonely. The princess looked up sharply. Lonely? I had everything I could want: power, respect, a destiny to rule over millions of beings. But did you have friends? Elena asked gently. People who cared about you, not because of your title, but because of who you were inside. Princess Lyrale was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. No, friendship implies equality, and I was taught that I had no equals. Other Zephyrians respected my position, but they feared disappointing me more than they cared about my well-being. And beings from other species, well, they were beneath my notice. Elena nodded understanding. So you've spent your whole life surrounded by people, but you've been alone. The princess's violet eyes met Elena's dark ones. I never thought of it that way, but yes, I suppose I have been alone. She paused. Is that why you risked your life for strangers? Because you see them as friends you haven't met yet? Elena smiled. Something like that. In human culture, we believe that everyone has value, regardless of their species or their power. When I saw those people in danger, I didn't think about whether they were strong or weak, important or ordinary. I just saw beings who needed help. But you could have died, the princess said, still struggling to understand. Your death would have meant the end of these peace negotiations. Millions of humans might suffer because you chose to save a few strangers. Elena was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. Princess, let me ask you something. If you had to choose between saving your own life and saving the lives of 10 innocent children, what would you do? I would save myself, the princess replied without hesitation. A ruler's life is worth more than the lives of ordinary citizens. That is the natural order. Elena shook her head. But that's where we're different. I believe that every life has equal value. Those people in the restaurant weren't just strangers. To me, they were someone's children, someone's parents, someone's friends. Their deaths would have created the same kind of pain and loss that my death would have created. Princess Lyrale stared at Elena with growing amazement. You truly believe that your life is worth no more than anyone else's? I believe that everyone deserves a chance to live, to love, to make their mark on the universe, Elena said simply. Power and titles don't make someone more valuable as a person. They just give someone more responsibility to help others. The princess stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. For 28 years, I have believed that the universe is a hierarchy, with the strong at the top and the weak at the bottom. I believe that this was natural law, as unchangeable as gravity or the speed of light. She turned back to Elena. But watching you risk your life for beings you barely knew has made me question everything I was taught. If hierarchy is natural law, then why did your actions feel more right than anything I have ever seen? Elena struggled to sit up more fully, ignoring the pain in her ribs, maybe because deep down, even your people know that true strength isn't about power over others. Maybe it's about the power to protect others, to lift them up instead of holding them down. Princess Lyrale returned to her chair and leaned forward intently. Tell me more about human leadership. How do your leaders earn the right to command others? In the best cases, they serve others first, Elena explained. They take responsibility for their people's welfare, They make sacrifices for the greater good, and they're willing to admit when they're wrong. Leadership isn't about being superior to everyone else. It's about being willing to carry the weight of everyone else's hopes and fears. The princess was quiet for several minutes, processing this completely foreign concept of leadership. Finally, she spoke. Ambassador Elena, I came here to thank you for saving my life. But I realize now that you have done something much more significant. You have shown me that everything I believed about strength and weakness might be wrong. Elena reached out with her uninjured hand and gently touched the princess's arm. You're not wrong. Princess, you're just incomplete. Your people's strength is real, but it's only one kind of strength. There are others worth learning about. As Princess Lyrale left the medical bay that evening, she carried with her a completely new understanding of what it meant to be truly powerful for the first time in her life. She began to wonder if being a leader meant being willing to sacrifice everything for those she served, rather than expecting them to sacrifice everything for her. 1 week after the terrorist attack, the negotiations resumed in a different conference room. The original chamber was still being repaired, and the new space felt smaller, more intimate. Elena sat at the human delegation table, her arm still in a sling but her mind sharp and focused. Today would determine whether the peace talks succeeded or failed completely. Princess Lyrale entered with her usual entourage, but something was different. Her posture was still regal, her movements still graceful. But there was a new quality in her violet eyes. Where once there had been cold certainty, now there was something that looked almost like doubt mixed with determination. The formal session began with reports from the investigation into the bombing. The Void Seekers had been captured, their plan exposed. They had hoped that chaos and fear would drive the two species back to war. But their attack had actually brought some delegates closer together. Elena noticed several species representatives sitting together who had barely spoken before the crisis. When it came time to discuss the territorial disputes, Princess Lyrale surprised everyone by speaking first. She stood slowly, her silver hair catching the light as she addressed the entire assembly. My fellow delegates, she began, her musical voice carrying clearly across the room. I have spent the past week reconsidering our position in these negotiations. Elena could see the shock on the faces of the other Zephyrian representatives. This was not what they had planned or expected. The Zephyrian Empire has always believed that strength comes from dominance, the princess continued. We have built our civilization on the principle that the powerful should rule over the weak, and that this is the natural order of the universe. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some delegates looked confused, others hopeful. But recent events have shown me that there are different kinds of strength, Princess Lyrale said, her eyes briefly meeting Elena's across the room. I have witnessed courage that has nothing to do with weapons or technology. I have seen beings risk everything, not for personal gain, but for the welfare of complete strangers. Elena felt her heart racing. She hadn't expected this. One of the princess's advisors stood up quickly and spoke in rapid Zephyrian. Elena couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clearly one of alarm and disapproval. The advisor was obviously trying to stop the princess from continuing. Princess Lyrale raised her hand, and her advisor fell silent when she spoke again. Her voice was firm with the authority of someone who had made up her mind completely. I am proposing new terms for our agreement, she announced. The Zephyrian Empire will withdraw our demands for human colonial territories. Instead, we offer to establish joint colonies where both species can work together as equals. The room erupted in shocked voices. Elena could hardly believe what she was hearing. The other human delegates were staring at each other in amazement, but the princess wasn't finished. Furthermore, we propose the creation of an interspecies council where representatives from all our worlds can work together to solve conflicts peacefully. No single species will have authority over the others. Now Elena could see real anger on the faces of some Zephyrian delegates. One of them, an elderly advisor with skin that glowed like starlight, stood up and began speaking urgently to the princess in their musical language. Elena didn't need translation to understand that he was furious. Princess Lyrale listened to her advisor's objections, then responded in Zephyrian. Her voice was calm but unyielding. The advisor tried to argue further, but the princess cut him off with a gesture that left no room for debate. Some of my people believe these terms are too generous, the princess said, switching back to the common language. They think I am showing weakness by treating other species as equals. She paused and looked directly at Elena. But I have learned that true strength is not about forcing others to bow before you. True strength is about lifting others up, even when it costs you something personally. Elena felt tears forming in her eyes. She had hoped the princess might be influenced by their conversations, but she had never imagined such a complete transformation. The princess continued speaking. The human ambassador Elena Vasquez risked her life to save beings from multiple species, including my own people. She did this not because she was ordered to, not because she hoped for reward, but because she believed it was right. That kind of courage, that kind of strength, is something my empire needs to learn. Elena stood up slowly. Her voice steadied despite her emotions. Princess, these terms are more generous than we dared hope for, but I want to make sure you understand what you're offering. Joint colonies mean sharing resources, sharing decisions, sharing power. Are you certain your people are ready for that? Princess Lyrale smiled, and for the first time since Elena had met her, it was a completely genuine expression. Ambassador, I am certain that my people need to learn what yours already know. We need to discover what it means to be strong through service rather than domination. The negotiations continued for several more hours, working out the details of this unexpected agreement. Elena found herself working closely with Princess Lyrale, and she was amazed by how quickly the princess grasped concepts that went against everything she had been taught. As the final documents were being prepared, Princess Lyrale approached Elena during a break. I want you to know something, she said quietly. When I return home, there will be those who question my decisions. Some may even challenge my right to rule. Elena looked concerned. Princess, I hope our friendship hasn't put you in danger. The princess shook her head. Any danger I face will be worth it. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something truly important. You showed me that leadership isn't about making people fear you. It's about making them believe in something better. The formal signing ceremony took place the next day. Representatives from dozens of worlds watched as Elena and Princess Lyrale put their names to the historic agreement. As they signed, the princess did something that shocked everyone present. She bowed to Elena. It was a small bow, barely more than a nod, but from Zephyrian royalty to a member of a species they had considered inferior, it was revolutionary. Elena responded by offering her hand in the human gesture of partnership, and the princess took it without hesitation. As Elena prepared to return to Earth with news of the successful negotiations, she realized that she had gained something more valuable than peace between their species. She had gained a friend who understood that the strongest people are those who use their power to protect and serve others. Princess Lyrale would return to her empire changed forever, carrying with her the knowledge that true strength comes not from standing above others, but from standing beside them. The universe had become a little bit safer, not because of superior weapons or advanced technology, but because one human diplomat had shown an alien princess what courage really meant. And in the years that followed, when historians wrote about the peace that ended the human-Zephyrian conflict, they would note that it wasn't won through military might or clever strategy, but through the simple power of one person treating another with dignity, respect, and compassion. Even when everyone said they were enemies,